This is the strategy inside everything. I'm Adam Pierno. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Strategy Inside Everything. We're going to talk about one of my passions and obsessions that I love to think about and probably think about too much. But I'm joined by a true expert in the space. I have Amanda Brennan. She is the Senior Director of Social Trends at XX Artists and a meme librarian. Amanda, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to dig in with you.
I am so grateful that you agreed to come on and talk because I'm always thinking about memes.
Same.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And I thought, who thinks about it more than me? There's maybe a handful of people. You're definitely one of them. So thank you so much.
No, thank you.
So could you give the audience a sense of, what your career path is? Like, how do you get so invested in memes? And I think it'll help them understand your expertise and how your understanding of meme culture.
Yeah, definitely. I graduated from college with a BA in English in 2008. And 2008 was surely a time I didn't know what I wanted to do. Ended up working in the mall for a year and just kind of like floated around. I ran into someone I went to college or high school with, and she mentioned she was going to library school. She was like, hey, I'm applying to Rutgers. Because New Jersey, I'm from New Jersey. Rutgers is the place to be. And she's like, you should think about it. I know you've always loved information. And I'm like, I'm bored. Why not?
So is it library sciences?
Yeah, library and information science.
Yeah.
I ended up getting in. I only applied to Rutgers. I was like, if this doesn't work out, I'll figure out something else. And I ended up starting at Rutgers. The same semester, they announced a social media, a social media concentration for the information science degree.
Oh, that's an interesting coincidence, huh?
Yeah, right. So I was like, this feels really right. I knew that I didn't want to work in a traditional library, which I love books, I love libraries, but I didn't really want to be as localized. Like when you're in a library, you're pretty hyper local, and I wanted to do something a little more a little bigger. So
when you say bigger, did you mean you didn't want to be confined to the physical stacks of a single library in a town and serving?
Yeah.
You were thinking how can I apply library and information sciences more broadly or have a bigger reach?
Exactly.
Okay.
And at this point I had known a lot of librarians, and I was at this point in my career where I was like, I know I've got something, an understanding that I can bring that I want to serve the world, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Lofty goals of the early 2010s. And at this point, I really studied how information structures are built online, not only with databases and metadata, but how we talk to each other through metadata. And I did my cornerstone project on Tumblr tagging, and this was, 2009, 2010. At this point, it was still very new. And on Tumblr, tagging is very unique, where you put a whole sentence in your tag. So it's not just hashtag cat, hashtag meow. It's hashtag my cat is the cutest cat in the world. Can you believe that I get to be in the same room as this thing? And these deep sentences were something that's so unique to Tumblr and fascinated me, because metadata is something that's just so internal and not meant to be processed like that. It's meant to be processed by computers.
Right.
But Tumblr came along and treated metadata as a whisper network of how you spoke to the people you were more easily connected to, because in Tumblr, Tumblr was the first place that reblogging became a concept. They had it before the retweet, and it was the beginning of a piece of content going so far out of your universe that these whisper tags that didn't really go with the content were a way to stay intrinsic while also expanding out.
Yeah, it's such an interesting human element to the technology that really doesn't exist anywhere else. I mean, I think Reddit is the next most human network.
Yeah.
But even so, there's not the same like level of whisper tags or information organization, because Tumblr does not have the vertical interest-based tags.
Exactly.
You have to really figure out how to search on Tumblr to find what you're looking for.
Yeah. It's high barrier to entry, but that's like, I love when people got to do a little work and then they end up there and they're just like, they find a beautiful treasure trove of content. So I did that in school. Then I started working at Know Your Meme, which is where the term meme librarian came from, because I was literally a librarian who worked categorizing memes.
Yeah. And I'm obsessed with Know Your Meme. So I read, I have an RSS of it. I read every post that they publish every day. And that's kind of my pop culture connection. And my kids are still like, how the hell do you know this, Dad? Why do you know about this? And it's like, well,
I love that. Like, it's such an amazing resource, and it's like evolved over the years as internet culture has evolved, but I think is so important to understanding like what is happening at a deeper level in culture than you can see at the highest level. Yeah. And they're doing incredible work and really thinking about how people, how people change so quickly and adapt so quickly to meme content.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was there for 3 years. I really focused on community building and getting really deep into like fandom, which led to me working at Tumblr for 7 years. And while I was at Tumblr,
that sounds like the right place.
Yeah, it was really meant to be. And I really focused on taking all of the tag information and making it usable for both people and computers at Tumblr. So it was like a perfect dovetail of information science and just my passion for online community. I built Fandometrics. Are you familiar with Tumblr Fandometrics?
I'm not.
Oh, fandom.tumblr.com. It is basically Nielsen rankings for inside Tumblr. Because Tumblr can be such a black box, it's really interesting and was important for me to show like, hey, these are the conversations that are happening here. And like getting to show a wider mass of people, like the deep inner workings of what was going on underneath the surface.
So this was your brainchild to figure out how can we express this in a way that people outside of the Tumblr ecosystem can have a window into it and understand it?
Yeah. So I started in November 2013, and my boss at the time, Danielle Sterley, handed me a 100,000 line spreadsheet and was like, "You're a librarian, make sense of this."
Oh.
And
was that good news or bad news?
It was wonderful news. Those spreadsheets are my love language.
Okay, perfect. So she found the right person.
Yeah. And it turned into Tumblr's very first year in review. So we took all of the tags and made like the most reblogged lists. So we were one of the first people to acknowledge K-pop as a genre and like K-pop fandom in 2013. It was incredible. And what I did after that, Fandometrics was built out of the year in review project, because I took all this data and like sometimes librarians will use something like a WorldCat or like a previously structured taxonomy and apply it to a data set and have the computer automatically sort things. But as someone who's like really focused on internet culture and recognizing that like the way that people talk about internet culture is not going to be in a WorldCat, we built the taxonomy backwards. So I let the data tell me what categories we needed. Your face is incredible, right?
So tell me more. Tell me more about this. So how do you work backwards from the data? You know, are you just sorting by most used terms and then grouping those into categories? I mean, is it that?
Yeah. It's like it was a lot of color coding early on, but letting the data inform like, oh, people are talking about art in a very specific way, and these are the types of tags they're using. Mm-hmm. So let's work like on the lowest level, we've got like pixel art, and then we can level that up to kind of like abstract and level that up to artist, and like thinking about how the tags sit within each other. A really great example of this is a TV show. Are you familiar with Supernatural?
Sure.
So Supernatural, 15 seasons. It's like a running joke that it's Tumblr's favorite fandom. And the way that people talk about the characters, because like it's also such like a weird web of like Dean Winchester, played by Jensen Ackles' main brother. He also becomes a demon at one point. So people would use the tag demon ! Dean to discern that they're not only talking about Dean Winchester, they're talking about this specific
window when he was the demon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like thinking about how these things ladder up and how they relate to each other, it's not anywhere else on the internet, really. Like people do this on Twitter and Reddit and all of these other places, but I really thought it was important to think about like how communities form and how they talk to each other. So we ended up using it as the backbone for our ad targeting technology, because like if you've ever bought an ad on Facebook, you know, like you can choose, I want to target, you know, this age group, this demographic, this place.
These
Tumblr
interests.
doesn't do that. Yeah. Tumblr is like, I want to target people who like, we've got a new TV show and I want to target people who love spooky shit and like hot, you know, young people and all of these things. So we would build these structures being like, okay, here's all the tags for Supernatural fandom. Here's all the tags for this. And I really love it because it puts interest first in a way that takes the user out of it.
Yes.
Where like you're not digging into someone's personal information that the computer is listening for. It's like, no, you've literally tagged something supernatural. So we know that you like this type of genre of TV.
You are volunteering it. Now it's up to Tombstone Pizza to make something relevant. So that person sees it and says, yes, I get it. This connects to me. There's something spooky about this ad or about this message versus just being like, shop now. Oh, yeah. Great. That's awesome, guys. You nailed it.
Exactly. And like, as both someone who's incredibly passionate about information and user privacy, it was really wonderful to work on that, even though like ad companies don't operate with that mindset. So it was an interesting problem, but a really fun one. So we built this whole taxonomy and a whole kind of relationship tree. I worked with incredible data scientists to understand like how information moves on Tumblr and focus on like the way that we approach trending was less about the stuff that's always going to be on top. So like BTS, for example, will always operate at a volume that is unlike any other fandom.
Nothing else is going to get close to it.
Exactly. A couple years ago, gosh, it was either 2016, 2017. Time is a prison. I have no concept of time. So it was like peak Hamilton era of Broadway fandom. Everyone knew about Hamilton. And that year, the top musical on Tumblr was something called Be More Chill. And Hamilton was number 2. And it was completely absurd to many people, but it was because we were looking at trending growth versus pure, like it wasn't just pure volume.
So it's like, more like velocity versus volume, like straight number of posts and reblogs. It was more about, no, it's gaining ground at this rate. And that's the more important metric to look at, is how many people are picking it up as a signal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And at that time, it was just a recording of the musical on Spotify. It had one performance in Red Bank, New Jersey. It was like based on a book that was out of print and hard to find. But the two people who created it, one of which is Joe Iconis, who is like an incredible musician, he was just like trying to get it out into the world. And a couple of Tumblr fans grabbed onto it and started making fan art. They found it. They unwrapped the story. It led to an off-Broadway revival for the show. And then on Broadway, they had a Broadway run that following year. And it was wild to me as someone who is like so in the data to see that happen in real life. And then to see the show, and it closed, I think it was August 2019, because I had tickets to go see it in Chicago the following March 2020. And that didn't happen.
Yeah,
but I remember I went to see it like within a month of closing, and just seeing all the fans and the magic that it was bringing to people. And it was like really internet, really beautiful, like very teenage meta, and just like crying, knowing that like the way that I had built a data structure allowed for this to happen.
Yeah.
And that was one of the most magical points in my career.
Yeah. It allowed the internet to will the thing to be resurrected, and more people could be exposed to it and experience it in a shared environment versus the single place you could have viewed it before.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like another language, as you just pointed out.
And it's interesting. I actually was just quoted in an article about this, thinking about this in 2022. People are much more aware of algorithms and how algorithms filter words.
Yes.
So that's why you'll see like OUID or OUID for weed, like SEGGS for sex.
I remember there was an article, I think it was Taylor Lorenz that wrote an article a couple months ago about how TikTok users are using these alternate words like unalive instead of dead or weird things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's really interesting. Like, as someone who's been in this industry for over a decade now, to see like the awareness that people have of how their language is affected by algorithms and like computer, like when you post something, there is definitely a computer level that looks at it, a computer layer that looks at your content before it even makes it to your followers.
Yeah.
And seeing like social media businesses, I follow a person, it's the Eighth House. They're like she's a cool witch. She runs a witch shop on Instagram, but she's always posting about like, hey, here's how the algorithm dings you if you're posting about shopping, or like, here's like what you have to face as a social media professional before you even get to running your online shop.
Yes.
And I've loved her content because, one, she's like super real, but two, seeing how someone who is not deeply in internet, the industry of the internet is seeing this and processing it has been fascinating for me.
Yeah, it is always interesting to have a layman or someone as an outsider come and explain things to you, and you say, "Oh, that's you got to the right place," but the way you got there is so interesting.
Yeah. It's something I always say at work, which I've been very grateful that people have taken and run with, is we all have our own internet. And right now, algorithms and the way that we have moved towards the way that just data is processed and the way that apps are built, they're built to keep you in kind of like your own little skyscraper of what is happening. And like, you can ride this elevator all day, but you won't know what's happening in the one next to you. And
that's right. There's 9 billion front doors and they don't all connect when you get inside. Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing that I really impress on my team, so I've been at XX for about a year and a half, and I really impress on the team now that I can focus on the whole internet instead of just one product, is like, we're all seeing different iterations of memes and trends. And what I'm seeing on Twitter is going to be very different from, as a 36-year-old queer woman from the East Coast is going to see something very different than like a 22-year-old straight male in LA. And what I'm more interested in now is finding like if you've got this set of trends and I've got this set of trends and like we've got 5 different sets, what is the tie that binds these things together?
Yes.
What is the deeper meaning behind like, you know, this TikTok meme and this Reddit thread and this Twitter post? Like these 3 things may look unrelated, but at the deeper meaning of it all is like this drive for whatever. And like, that's what I want to know.
Yes. And that's why I wanted to talk to you. I mean, when I think of, and even the word meme, depending on who you talk to. So if I talk to, a 65-year-old woman in, the Northwest, when she thinks of meme, she's probably thinking of some Minions meme that is on Facebook. And, you're thinking of something on Tumblr, and I'm thinking of something on Twitter. Even the word meme has become algorithmically defined.
Yeah.
I only know it as I'm exposed to it, which is why I read Know Your Meme as religiously as I do, because I don't spend a lot of time on TikTok, but I want to be plugged into what the trends are. And I haven't put the brain power to it the way you have to figure out, okay, well, what's happening below the surface that is connecting those stories or those memes.
I'm going to take you on a journey for a little bit.
Please.
About words.
Let's go. I'm strapping
All right. Are you familiar with the word emo?
Of course.
Yeah. When I say the word emo, how would you define it?
I am older than you. So when I translate it in my brain to goth, I know it's not the same thing, but like that's the translation I do. I go, oh, well, when I was that age, that's what it meant. And that was kind of the approximation.
Got it. Okay. So I grew up, early O's in New Jersey. Emo was like a very specific thing. It was like this very specific set of bands.
I can hear the music.
Yeah. And I was obsessed with this website called Audio Galaxy. Like no one's ever heard of it, but it was basically a giant taxonomy of every band you could think of. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why my brain is the way it is, because that was my formative youth. But like for me, emo is like Sunny Day Real Estate and Braid and the Get Up Kids. And like, I can see like a very distinct timeline. When I worked at Hot Topic at the end of the OOs, emo was the Black Veil Brides, My Chemical Romance, Fall Out Boy. It was a completely different genre of music that had built on.
That's what I was thinking. That's the music I said when I said I could hear the bands. That's the level I got in at. So I got in 3 years or 5 years after.
Exactly. But like, that's how emo was marketed in a different way. And like, there a lot of what I've been thinking about lately is like how content, for lack of a better word, gets watered down for the lowest common denominator. And like, it's not necessarily a good or bad watered down. It's like, not everyone can be as deep in a thing. And not everyone can get into this level, like in using the skyscraper metaphor, not everyone is going to go to the tallest floors of the skyscraper. You need like this entry level edition of it. And I think like, as someone who is deeply in the genre and watched it blossom, like the first NCR album is incredibly like, it's the bridge between what I think of as emo and what like the rest of the world does. And you could see how it evolves in their second album and so on and so on. But it's like it's like, what's the 9 degrees of Kevin Bacon or something?
6 degrees.
Yeah. It's like the degrees away. But once you get X amount of degrees away, you can get a bigger audience and thus a bigger, for lack of a better term, marketing pool.
Yeah.
So when I think about the word meme and now the word trend, I think about it in the same projection of like meme and internet culture can mean a lot of different things. Like I like to define meme as a thing that moves from person to person and changes along the way. It can be a picture. It can be a word. It could be a phrase. It could be an aesthetic. Like memes are so elastic, and the way that it changes is really the mimetic quality of it. Mm-hmm. And I think when I think of emo, the way that it has changed is the mimetic quality of what emo means. And like you say emo to someone who is, 18 right now, they have a completely different world because it's gone through so many iterations by the time it's gotten to them. Mm-hmm. And that a great example, what you used before of like the Minion memes to a very specific sect of people, Minion memes, that is meme. And you will say like, well, what about the phrase, hey, babe, are you okay? You barely touched your ex. Yeah. I mean, like, what? No, yes. They would be so confused.
Yeah.
And I think we're at this point where virality has gotten into this mess of like, because everyone wants to be viral. TikTok has completely changed the game of how to go viral, and like these one-off moments are what people are seeking now. And like people will consider these one-off moments trends, which leads back to like sleepy time chicken. If you heard about that in the past couple of weeks,
Sniper like chicken is stupid. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a trend. Like it's not something that multiple people are doing. It was like one dumb post from 2017 that gets sent back into the trend cycle, and like it goes viral. And then someone who is not equipped with the words to understand internet culture, they're like, oh, I saw this one post. It is a trend, just as people would say, like, it is a meme.
Yes.
And I think that's just like this weird shift in language that has to do with marketing, but also like lowest common denominator reach.
But it becomes a mechanism of poorly translated understanding that they use the word trend, and then my local news is actually covering it because when they say trend, they take it out of internet culture, and they're interpreting it as like people are really doing this. It's a trend. Yeah. That people. It's like, no, nobody ever did that. Some jerk posted a picture on whatever 4chan or whatever it was.
Yeah, 4chan.
And here we go. Now somebody found it and it gets reposted by someone else who adds a layer of irony to it.
Exactly. And it's like Tide Pods all over again.
Yeah. Yes. I don't know that anybody ever ate one until it became a thing like,
exactly.
We should eat them, and we should do it on YouTube's because it'll be funny and I'll get some heat.
Yeah.
Very cheap heat.
Yeah. It's funny when Tide Pods are like at the height. I did a huge folklore convention out in Utah with, I'm blanking on the name of it, but it was all these folklorists, and they were looking at the overlap of memes and folklore. And again, being like in this room with this different perspective of people, this different set of words around internet culture, and hearing like these similar things. And like Tide Pods is essentially folklore of like, oh, I have heard the story of someone eating a Tide Pod, and now you're blowing it up, just like Slender Man. I think Slender Man is one of the greatest examples of internet folklore. And I've worked with some incredible folklorists like Lynn McNeil and Trevor Blank, who have really, really nailed this in the folklore context. And at that convention, one of the students ended up making a Tide Pod cake to represent like this overlap of meme and folklore, and just like, what are we even doing? What is this?
Yeah, well, Slender Man is something I've written about, and the idea of memes as folklore is a really apt way to look at it. I've never thought about it that way. That's a really nice, that passing of information from one person to the next. Folklore usually traditionally orally, but this is anything but. The digital transmission has changed the scale of it and the scope, but the same idea of how a story in folklore changes when it leaves the original circle, gets to the next circle, and all of a sudden there's a new element that's added to it, or somebody, the way Santa Claus has changed over time as it got to Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, now we're gonna reshape the story for 1 million people or 10 million people versus a village.
Yeah.
And memes are kind of that way too. Like you referenced, babe, are you okay?
Yeah.
The more you see that, I just jump to the word.
Yep.
I see babe R and I look at the last word. And I'm like, what's the joke? Oh, okay, you barely touched your GDP. Like, okay, I get it. Right. I know what happened in the headline today. I can make the connection of whatever it is. Is that something that scale and jumping scale, is that something you've experienced or witnessed?
Oh my gosh.
Or where I should rephrase that as a question you could actually answer. Where do you see memes change the most, or especially at Tumblr, I would imagine you'd have more of a control panel of this where you could see that they shift trajectory or change meaning.
It's wild because it's as any type of linguistic thing, like by the time it reaches you, it's already changed meaning. Mm-hmm. And have you read Because Internet by Gretchen McCullough?
Not yet. I will be ordering it as soon as we hang up.
Yeah, it is an incredible book about internet language and how like it's almost impossible to document because of the way like it's not only happening in a computer mediated way, it's happening in real life. Like just the way that we speak to each other, like by the time it gets back to the internet as something new, it's already been changed so much that you can't really trace the trajectory. Yeah. And I think just to go back to Slenderman, because I've done a lot of work and research on it, is interesting. It started out on the Something Awful forums. This one guy photoshopped the photo and like gave it some loose context. Victor Surge is his name. And then it was a couple months later, a group of videographers, Troy, I'm blanking on their names right now, but these three kids started a web series called Marble Hornets on YouTube. Yep. And in Marble Hornets, they gave the concept of slender sickness, where when you get close to Slender Man, you start coughing and like you develop some kind of illness from being close to it. And like that was never in the original context.
Nothing was in the original. The original context is look at that shape in the background. It's really wild.
Yeah, disappearing kids. And they took it and iterated on it. And then they gave it the operator symbol, which is the X in the circle. And like that turned into something new. And then like the Slenderverse popped up of like all these different series exploring these things. And I think to me, that's one of the most amazing examples of like iteration and change, because it is documented with timestamps of uploads. Yes. But also because you can see how it layers on top of each other and like the references build to create the folklore. And I just love Slenderman as an example.
Yeah. And obviously because it culminated in real world terror and a terrible movie, which did not
multiple terrible movies.
Yeah, that's right. and very heavily borrowed terrible movies as well that don't use the real name of Slenderman, but borrow the idea. Nobody's ever done it justice compared to how scary it is to just look at some of the creepypasta and say, yeah, that's a much scarier idea than this terrible like slasher movie where it's the formula has been applied to it by Hollywood.
Yeah. But just to go back to like full circle conversation, it gets watered down for the biggest, the what did I say earlier? Like least common denominator. Yeah. Like you want it to reach as much people. So you have to water it down and take it out of that context. And then
in that example that when it goes from, its original post and there was more text-based context added before Marble Hornets, but in the Marble, what's just occurred to me as you were walking through that timeline, Marble Hornets is a different platform. It is YouTube versus the original platform. And so I wonder if that's where the transmission, like the story changed, they add a new element, but not only did they add a new element, they did it in a new way, in a new platform and a new format. So people were, to your point earlier, it's not just that somebody read it, it's the information gets to people in a different way. And now it's like, whoa,
exactly.
It was pouring gasoline on it.
Yeah. And the way that like, it kind of spiders out as like, while this was happening, there were other people continuing to do creepypasta. There were people continuing to do fan art. There was also like the era of the Trender Man. Have you ever heard of that one?
No, that one I don't know.
So someone found a mannequin that looked like Slender Man. It was just like a white face, but it was wearing like a hip sweater. And it was like, oh, this is Slender Man's cousin, Trender Man. And then there was Slender Man, and it was like this deep dive into like the I would call it like the stuff you do when you're high with a meme. Like that just kind of absurdity of like, okay, how do we push this to be weirder and weirder?
Yeah.
And then I'd be remiss not to talk about the Kenosha stabbing and like someone who took it very seriously in a completely different way, thinking that it was real and something that could affect their real lives.
Yes.
And like all of this is happening simultaneously. And again, to like go back to the skyscrapers, like it's happening in buckets where they are not talking to each other and just kind of forming on their own, even though they all started at the same photoshopped something awful post. Like they have gone and formed their own worlds around it.
Yeah. And you wonder if people who take it seriously see the absurdist stuff, or if they're never exposed to that. And so they're never able to see like, oh, it's fake, it's silly, you know, or there's a silly side to this. Maybe I don't need to be taking it as seriously as I am. And there's other internet phenomenons that, you know, you wish you could inject some levity into, where people start taking it very seriously and you say, you know, guys, this is a joke, or this is just someone posting some cryptic crap that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
It's being transmitted again and again and growing each time.
Yeah. And it's the blessing and the curse of the algorithm, honestly. Like you get put into a certain set of content and it just feeds you more like it. And it's not like it knows algorithms across the whole internet, like know like, hey, I see you going down this path. I'm going to keep showing you this path. Like I'm not going to show you the weird stuff necessarily. And I think something I love on Twitter is the viral tweets moment.
Yeah.
If like seeing these weird things that like, I imagine those is the thing that like most people on Twitter are seeing, and just the absurdity within it, and like the levels of nuance added to these posts that are just like, you need to have been on Twitter for like 10 years to understand them sometimes.
Yes. It's like those yes, no tweets where
yes,
you really have to have this legacy of the platform itself to even understand the shorthand that is being applied, because it has to fit in 280 characters.
Yeah. But it's just like, I think we all as internet users, especially over the past couple of years, as life has moved so online, forget that like everyone's internet is different. And everyone is seeing a different flavor of something. And like what I understand, to go back to my emo reference, what I understand as like, oh yeah, emo revival, like I can't wait to go listen to this weird album. Like people are thinking like, oh, emo revival, MCR's on tour. And it's just completely different understanding. And not that one person is wrong. Like it's just the different lenses, the different path that we have taken to get here.
And in fact, like, both things can be true.
Yeah. And I say this as someone who is very deeply into old school emo and also MCR. Yeah. Like there are different flavors, but depending on who you're talking, and like, it's all, again, for lack of a better term, it's kind of code switching of like, oh, I'm talking to someone of this age. Like, let me just talk about emo as this and not get into the weeds of like fighting. And I think this is something really interesting that Gen Z has done, because Gen Z just comes in and has all this information laid out in front of them. Whereas like, I'm a millennial, I had to do all this research. There's a lot less gatekeeping within Gen Z.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm Gen X, and gatekeeping was the coin of the realm. To have an album that you love that nobody else knew about, or to be into writing that nobody else knew about, was like, that was prestige. You'd be like, oh yeah, I saw that movie. I just didn't tell you about it. Like, you're right. For Gen Z, it's more like, look at this thing I found. I'm going to post it in its entirety, and everybody should have access to it. It is the opposite.
Exactly.
I mean, they use, I guess they're the same thing. It's just they have the tools to broadcast their cultural awareness, versus for Gen Xers, I didn't even have texting. So I could only tell people face to face, maybe I had email Friendster, finally.
Oh, never forget. But like, it's both. I think it really rounds out this conversation well to think about like how Gen Z approaches this. Everything is available to them at all times. And I think it's why trends move so quickly, because Gen Z does not feel like they have to, like, once they're goth forever. Like, no, they can be playful. They can be pastel goth. They can bring it to The Sims. I just saw a really incredible Instagram reel of your goth dad. So have you seen your Korean dad on TikTok?
I've seen that.
Yeah. It's the same vibe, except it's, I want to say that it's a band and the one guy in the band is doing it, but it was like, your goth dad talks to you about your pet's death. And it's like sitting down and being like full goth makeup, but in that same, and they're from somewhere in the Midwest. So he's got like a very like Fargo accent.
Oh, I love it.
And it's just like so incredible. I don't know. It's like really beautiful when you can get into all these different worlds. But it also requires you as a person to like push yourself out of your own world sometimes.
Yeah. Amanda, I probably could talk to you till 5 p.m. So
Same.
I'm not going to do that, but I'm so grateful that you made time, and I'm glad I had the chance to meet you. Closing out here, where can people find you online?
I thought I was going to be a linguist, so my internet handle is continuance. It's a fancy word for vowels. I am on Twitter, Instagram. I'm not on TikTok. That's a whole other hour-long conversation. But yeah, memelibrarian.com is my Tumblr.
I love it. I will link to those places in the show notes, and maybe we will, if I'm lucky, I'll schedule an hour with you to hear your story about TikTok.
Amazing.
Thank you so
much.
Awesome. Strategy Inside Everything is produced by me, Adam Pierno. If you like what you've heard, leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Actually, I have no idea if that helps or if it's ever done anybody any good. If you really want to help the show and you like what you've heard, share it with someone else who you think will dig it. That's the best way to help the show and keep the conversation growing. If you have an idea, a question, or want to push back, go to that'snotaninsight.com, where you can send me a message or leave me a voicemail that will be added to future shows. Music for the Strategy Inside Everything is by Saw Square Noise. For more information on me, you can go to adampierno.com to learn about my books, my speaking, and my consulting practice. Thanks for listening.